Hey Tanya, what's going on?
It's been so long.
It's been so long, right? So we did two interviews today, and then the one we just did was with David Delisle, and man, that was an awesome interview. I even was sending you messages while we were interviewing him saying like, "Oh, this conversation's awesome," because it genuinely was. I feel like he was putting out a lot of great info, especially for parents, right? That might be struggling with trying to figure out their kids like me. So I don't know. What do you think? How'd that go?
Yeah, like how to teach your kids about money, but not just like saving, investing, and stuff like that. Like the
Mhm.
actual values, your values around money, which I
Yeah,
think obviously as an adult we can think about. It's making us think about what do we really value and what's important to us, what we're spending our money on. So I really love how he uses that book, which I think is really cool. It's like a adventure novel for kids
hmm,
on the importance of your awesome stuff, like what makes you happy, what brings you joy when it comes to money is amazing.
100%. And yeah, and like you said, too, not just money, but like what is it that you value, right? Is it time? Is it certain acts? Is it certain things in life? And finding those things that you value and focusing on that, right? And I feel like that is a great lesson for anybody, whether you're a child or an adult, is what is it that you value in life, right? And then how do you kind of gear your life around that to be able to get more of that thing that you value, right? And I thought that was super awesome. And, kind of trying to break that cycle of always chasing, right? Because that's one of the things he was explaining about his story when he talked about his dad and everything. Again, I'm not spoiler alert. So for this episode, some really great just life lessons, things that he learned from his dad growing up and things that he knew that he wanted to change in his own life based on what he felt was important to him, right? So I don't know, Tanya, what do you think about that? Like the mindset piece was just really awesome.
Yeah, I mean, you can resonate with somebody who's like, he's been through a lot and he's used what he learned growing up as a kid with his dad to now educate and help not just his own kids, but kids and families around the world. Like you can tell his passion for that. And like you said, it doesn't matter if you have kids or not. This is super important for your mindset and thinking about how we're operating around money and why we want certain things or do certain things. So
100%. Yeah. For those of you that are tuning in right now, don't skip through this episode. There's some great information throughout the entire episode. You guys are going to really enjoy it. Hope you enjoy the episode
you
and
listen.
tune in.
This is Brandon Turner, and you are listening to the Average Joe Finances Podcast.
If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you smash the like and subscribe buttons. If you're listening to our podcast, go leave us a 5-star review. All of our links can be found in the video description or show notes below. Hey, welcome back to the Average Joe Finances podcast. I'm your host, Mike Cavagioni,
And I'm your co-host, Tanya Schultz.
and today's guest is a special guest named David Delisle. And so David and Tanya actually know each other from FinCon, so that's super awesome. And I just met David for the first time today, and just talking off camera, solid person. And I'm super excited to have this conversation. So, David, thank you so much for taking the time out today to join us on the show.
Yeah, I'm so excited, Mike. This will be a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. So, hey, let's kick this off the same way we start every podcast episode. And actually, I'll shoot that over to Tanya for you to ask the first question this time.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, first of all, I want to tell people what FinCon was if they if they don't know what that is.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Really a financial conference for creators and people in the investment space that happens every year. So definitely check that out. If you're into personal finance, it's a great conference and you get to meet awesome people who are creating similar content related to personal finance. So yeah, we connected there and it's just an awesome place to meet people. But yeah, so tell us a little bit about yourself. Like I obviously know some of your background, but tell us about yourself, share your story. Who is David Delisle?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to do the cliff notes so we don't get into it too much. But we were just talking earlier, like I was telling Mike. So I'm a dad. I've got two young boys, 12 and 14, but the 14-year-old's turning 15 this week. So 12 and 15. And for me, like we met at FinCon, and for those who don't know, like the tagline is where money nerds unite. And definitely, I've always been a bit of a money nerd. So I was reading finance books when I was like 10, and not because my parents told me to or even enjoyed or loved this stuff. It was just things that I like to do. So I've been investing for most of my life. And as I got older, the reason I started to mention my boys is because I wanted to sort of teach them and teach them some of the lessons I'd learned and the good things, the bad things, what's really important. And I realized there wasn't much out there that talked about finances the way I think about it. And so I wrote a children's book that's a graphic novel that teaches financial literacy, and it makes it a fun adventure, easy to learn. And that's how I've started to get more and more into the finance space in terms of like teaching this financial literacy and becoming really passionate about it.
I absolutely love that. That's one of the reasons why the way we do the podcast, the way we do it is I always like to explain things like talk to me like a fifth grader, right? And I'm not saying like dumb things down, but I'm saying do it in a way that it's more digestible for somebody to take this information and not really have to think too hard about what you just said, right? So, no, I love that. So, a children's book on financial literacy, what a great thing to do, right? What a great gift to give to the world, right? To help kids learn financial literacy. Because I think that's one of the most important things. As a matter of fact, on the last interview that we just had, talked about that a little bit because I homeschooled my kids their whole life so far. And now that my oldest is going to be in high school, one of the things that she's going in equipped with is a knowledge of personal finances and how to do certain things that you don't really see too much in schools nowadays. So when I see somebody that is giving to children, right, to give them financial literacy, that really carries a lot of weight in my book. So thank you for doing what you do. I think that's amazing. So I want to ask you then now, so since you wrote this book, right, and you probably have a great way of explaining finances to people because you put it into that perspective, how would you say that, or what are some of the things that you've experienced in your life that made you turn to being a quote unquote finance nerd, right? Because you said you started reading finance books at like 10. So what was it in your life that that got you so interested in learning about money?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a lot of just this journey of writing the book, thinking about it, and really reflecting. Because for me, it just seemed normal. So I didn't realize that it was different, that I would have been so interested in finance. But really, if I think about it, so my dad was a blue collar worker, worked really hard, played really hard, but he hated his job. He was never around. He was a commercial diver. He'd be away for months. And just for him, he just felt like work is supposed to be this thing, this burden, and you do it and you do it for your family. It's not supposed to be fun, but that was his contribution. And he was just miserable doing it. And so at a young age, when I realized like you could put money, and this is back before we had banks the way we do now, where they cost us money. But when I was younger, you put money in a bank and they pay you interest and give you money. And I remember this idea of just like, I could put money in a bank, do nothing else, and have more money like a month later or the next day. And I just was fascinated by that idea. And I think, especially because I saw how hard my dad was working and how miserable he was doing it. So, this idea of another way or an alternative or another use of that money he made so he might not have to work so hard, it became something that fascinated me.
Yeah, I think that's true for a lot of people, like how they grew up impacts whether they learn about money or don't learn about money and how that impacts them. And something I guess I want to dig into that question a little more. Did you ever talk to him about that? How have you resolved some of that? Now, obviously it worked to your benefit, right? Because you went to like actually being able to invest and everything like that. How have you working through the book and like how that's impacted you?
Yeah, so it's sort of bittersweet, but a lot of this, like my dad and I, we would argue about this stuff all the time and argue in a fun way. Like he respected my decisions, I respected his. It wasn't like we were battling, but for him, like he just never understood the idea that money could work for itself, like money could create money. For him, it was always you work to make money and then you spend it. and the risk involved with investing or the uncertainty, like it just felt like play money to him or not real or not tangible. We did disagree on a lot of these things. And then the reason I become so passionate about it, because he was always chasing this dream of more and wanting more and didn't have the time to spend with myself or my brother as we were growing up, and was just busy and miserable. And so I always felt if I could teach him some of these concepts, his life would be better. He'd find more freedom. He'd find more of the things that made him happy. But he passed away. So that's the bittersweet part. Like he passed away at a young age. He was about 54 and never really learned these lessons. He was starting to realize that what he was chasing wasn't what was important to him. There were other ways to live a rich life, but he didn't live long enough to really experience that. And so that's part of my passion now. Like I don't want other people to not learn these lessons and not be able to experience that and not be able to live their life. And so, yeah, it's one of those things we talked about a lot though, and would argue. And I can still hear him now, like, oh, Dave, what do you like? The market's going to change, or this is going to happen, or the sky's going to fall.
That was what he learned, right? That was what he learned in his way of, yeah, that sounds like it has a big impact, and obviously unfortunate what happened, but it's great that you can use those lessons to now help more people.
100%.
Yeah. Well, and back to what Mike was saying, we're trying to make it so everyone understands, even a 5-year-old. I can see all those sides. Like I know what it feels like to just not understand money, because these were my conversations with my dad. It did help a lot in trying to make this so if you're not a money nerd and you're not at FinCon and you're not talking my language, I still understand your language.
So, David, I want to ask you, because you brought this up. One, I'm sorry for your loss. I lost my father too at a younger age. He was 62. Life happens, and
It's tough.
we move on. It's definitely tough. So I'm sorry for your loss. But as you were talking about that, there was something that you mentioned about he was trying to discover how to live, or you were trying to explain to him how to live a rich life. So can you explain that a little bit to our listeners? What do you call living a rich life?
Yeah, well, that's what I've realized. And especially in writing this book and talking with kids and talking about money all the time, a lot of the conversation is around how to have more money, which makes sense.
Sure.
And that's what a lot of us are looking for when we want to learn financial literacy. That's what we're thinking.
Yep.
But I realized, that chase for having more money never ends. So that's how my dad grew up. It didn't matter what he had, what he achieved. It was just more and more and more. So I remember moving into bigger houses and him buying nicer vehicles and us going on better vacations. And as he made more, it never meant he worked less or that he achieved what he was chasing. It just became more. And so that relationship with money and understanding what's really important to you versus the endless chase that you never really ever get to the end of, that's really important to me. And that's this idea of what I talk about in the book is like the awesome stuff and what really brings you joy and what's really important to you, because it's usually not that more that we're chasing. It's usually simpler things. You just mentioned your dad and your daughters. I mentioned my kids, like that connection and family and all these other things. Like that's usually what really means something to someone. And all the rest of the things, it fades away in comparison.
Well, to touch on that, like the way you're describing it, like that's why there's a very common saying that says more money, more problems, right? You make more money, you're going to find a way to spend it, which is why changing your mindset is so important, right? On what do you do with your money, right? So I definitely appreciate that.
Yeah.
Interview.
They always say, you hear the stats, like psychology of money is like your behavior is 80% of finance. You need to know the how and how to manage it and what the practical side, but a lot of that is common sense. It is the mindset and your habits. And I think that's why it's super important what you're teaching too, especially at a young age, is understanding that, because it took me into my 30s to be like, oh shoot, all these patterns are repeating themselves. Yeah. So how do you explain it in the book for kids? Because these kids they see social media now these days, and they have these perceptions of reality that is so not realistic. Like, how do you help kids in this way now see actually I want to go on like a trip to the mountains, not like buy a fancy, I don't know, whatever it is. Like, how do you
Mhm.
Get that across to kids nowadays.
So, and it's one of those things where it's tricky, but at the same time, it's easy. And so I mentioned briefly the awesome stuff. And to me, this is like one of the most important lessons we should be learning and one of the most important concepts in the book. And the awesome stuff is basically just what really brings you joy. And so when you're looking to buy something or you want something, simply pausing and asking the question, is this my awesome stuff? And that's it. And you'll notice, and this is in the book, like I talk about it, and even the protagonist in the book is like, well, that's ridiculous. Like all my stuff is awesome. What are you even talking about? But if you do this, adults as well, you'll start to realize like the more you focus on what brings you joy, the more you realize what doesn't. And for most of us, where we're spending our time and our money, it's not on the things that bring us joy. And so you'll see that start to shift over time and it'll constantly change. And that's one of the things I'm most proud of with my boys, because I try not to hit them over the head with financial literacy, because me being their dad, like it'll do the opposite and they'll just reject all of it. But they understand what's really important to them. So their friends have all these things. And like you said, the social media, there's the comparison. Everyone's got the better shoes and the new games, and there's so much stuff. But my guys aren't trying to have those things. And they're not jealous of their friends, but they're also not, envious or think it's ridiculous. It's just they understand what's important to them. And that's what's so cool about this. And same for adults. Like you really understand what's important to you as you start to notice what really brings you joy, what brings that lasting joy. And I've got so many examples of this where I've talked through people and they think they get it. And then all of a sudden they realize, oh no, that's not what makes me happy. It's this other thing. And you just, all those, it doesn't matter what someone else has, what brings you joy, everything else doesn't matter.
So I love that, David. I absolutely love that. Actually, I want to go have a conversation with my kids after we record this episode and just ask them, like, what does bring you joy? What does bring you happiness, right? Because I try to give them the life that I didn't have when I was a kid. Now, I'm not saying that I didn't have much. My father was very not good with his finances, to say the least. Similar situation to yours. He got money and he would spend it, right? And I'm trying to show my kids that's not how this works, right? You need to put money away. You need to save. You need to invest. You need to set yourself up for the future, right? Because you don't want to work until the day you die. Like, I don't want to work until the day I die. I want to be able to spend time with them, spend time with my wife, and enjoy the time that we have here, right? Because it is limited. When there are things, the only things in life that are guaranteed is death and taxes. It comes for us all, right? So I feel like part of what you're talking about here is living this rich life, is this mindset piece that I feel like is where the focus really is, right? And it's how do you shift that mindset, especially to a child, right? Because I have teenage daughters and I deal with this all the time. It is very hard to get them to, I guess, maybe not listen, but get them on the same page, right? Because you said something as soon as you said it, it like triggered in the back of my head, was like, if I tell them to do this, they're going to do the opposite, right? Or they're not going to listen to me. They don't want to listen to me, or talking about personal finances. So what is it that you say that you do that gets them to really just get it? Is it focus on setting the example? What is it that you do to try to get your kids in that right mindset?
Well, one, just being open and transparent. So I'll talk to them about what my awesome stuff is and what lights me up and why I make the decisions I do. So like this trip, you're just asking about this trip. We just did this trip to India and it was hard. It was a bit of an adventure. It pushed them to their limits, but we experienced all these new things and new cultures. And I learned more about them. And I'm like, this is what I value. But it doesn't mean that's what they're going to value, but they start to see it. And a lot of it, like when I talk to kids, it's that it's what's really interesting is they know what their awesome stuff is better than adults. So as adults, like we have been influenced by the social media and what we should be doing or not be doing. And we feel like it's the house and the car and the watch because it's what we've been sold. Whereas kids, like they know, like even that young child, like a 5-year-old or 3-year-old, if you're like, is that your awesome stuff? This thing they're having a tantrum over. If you can get them to pause and just seriously ask that question of themselves, they're pretty honest with it. And that's where even as parents, like we know what their favorite thing is in the sense of that favorite stuffy or toy, where if you're on a vacation and you lose this thing, they're going to freak
Game
out.
over.
Game over. We know what they're,
Yeah.
if you had to pick one toy in their room or one piece of clothing or one little like memento or gift they received, we know as parents what it is because our kids know. And that starts becoming the benchmark. So instead of like with your girls, all these things that they want to get because they're excited, it's like you love whatever it is, that becomes your benchmark. Everything else is compared to that. And if they're honest with themselves, they know what their awesome stuff is. And as adults, we can start doing the same.
Yeah, how does time play into this? Because a lot of from a kid's perspective, from what I've read, the quality of time that we can spend with our kids, I don't have kids, but just knowing the time I wanted to spend with my parents is invaluable. And what I heard you saying with your dad was like, you kind of didn't get that, right? And that is part of people's awesome stuff, is like taking those trips together or just spending time hanging out together might be somebody's awesome stuff. And just being able to buy back time and have more time. I guess, how do you get across that concept, or how does that come up for people?
Well, and that's the beauty with the transparency and having those conversations. So that's where, back to this idea of just like the average Joe, of making it simple where everyone gets it. You don't have to have all the answers. So even as a parent, like you can talk to your kids, even if you don't really understand some of this stuff, or you feel like you might make wrong decisions, like you can have these conversations and tell them, hey, involve them in decisions. We really want to do this renovation on the house, or fix your bedroom, or buy you this toy, or go to this theme park, but it's going to cost all this extra money. Should we do that? Or what do you think about doing this instead? Or what if instead I just took a week off and we could just go to the beach and I didn't have to work for the next 5 days because we could just do something locally. Bring them in, because it's going to be, like you mentioned, time. For me, time's super valuable, and it's going to be one of the most important things, and that quality time. But that's because I didn't get it from my dad and I really wanted it. Other people, that's not going to be their thing. It's going to be a big fire pit in the backyard so you can roast s'mores in the evenings and have a big family get together. Like, it's going to be different for everybody. So having those conversations and just transparency and talking to kids about it, so they understand these are the choices. If we go to Disneyland come spring break or some other time, I'm not going to be able to get time off. I'll need to be working. Is that the choice we want to make? And bring them in on that.
Yeah. Oh, I feel that, because we actually just took a trip to Disney World. I took 3 weeks and we went to Florida to see my in-laws. And while we were there, we took a trip to Orlando, did Disney. I got my new lightsabers back there because I'm just a big kid. And no, it was great. To that point, to me, it was about the family time that we got, right? By being able to spend time with their grandparents, but then also the time that I was able to give them at Disney World. And the only thing I wanted was to go get my lightsabers. After that, I said, what do you guys want to do? We'll go wherever, do whatever rides you want. My daughter had me on these roller coasters that I did not want to go on, but I did it. And then Universal too. And it was great, right? So, and I think about, how did I get here to the point where I could live in Hawaii and then just take 3 weeks and just take my family on this big trip and drop all this money to do all these things, right? And it was part of what I've been able to build throughout my career, but also by understanding finances and understanding how to save and how to invest and get myself to a point where I'm making enough passive income that I can take time off whenever I need to and things like that, right? So, David, I want to shift this a little bit, right? When it comes to that mindset, how does somebody go from I want to budget and save mindset to an abundance mindset, right? Because there is a difference, right? If you want to focus on saving and everything, that's one part of it. But then when you get to the abundance mindset of, okay, I want to give back and get back, right? So if that makes sense, right? For me, I want to give my children more of my time, right? Because of all the efforts that I've put in. And for me, it was a shift. I had to shift my mindset a bit. So is that something that you kind of explain it all in your book, or is that going to be like in another iteration in the future? Or what are your thoughts on that just in general, shifting from that, I guess, a scarcity mindset, right, to an abundance mindset?
Yeah, great question. And that's the thing. So the book, there is some relatively tactical things and habits, but I really do emphasize and try to focus on the mindset. And I love that we're going in that direction here with this conversation because it's so important. And I don't think people really realize how important it is. And so there's a few parts to it. One, by understanding what really brings you value and joy and what's important to you, you start chasing less because it just doesn't matter. Like a lot of things that are important to you, they're simpler. Like you mentioned, like time with your kids, all those other things. Like you mentioned, you have that flexibility and you could do the 3 weeks in Disneyland, but some of that as well, like you could have made different decisions and bought a whole bunch of things and increased your cost of living with the house you live in and the clothes you wear, the car you drive,
100%.
and you
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to do that. So there is some of that where like really understanding what's important to you. And if what's important to you is time with your kids and that's your focus and you're doing more of that, you will start to feel that abundance because you're making that decision. But another piece, and this is interesting because I talk about people a lot where if they have that lack mentality or they don't feel abundance, one of the lessons I talk about is give and you'll have more. And part of that is because there is this energy to giving where it does actually just even financially make you richer. There's studies that show that there's a way that energy and that money comes back to you tenfold. So that's some of it. But also, and this is what I love the most, is it's very difficult to have that scarcity mindset if you're in the state of giving and generosity. And I try to talk about it in a way where it can be financial giving and generosity, but it doesn't have to be. It could be of your time or your physical effort and all these other things. But giving in general, it's really hard to feel scarcity and not abundance when you're able to help others.
Yeah, that's amazing. That was one of the hardest things for me, actually, when on my personal finance journey, starting to give. That's still something I practice every month. I have it in my budget to give financially and to give back time. Same thing with Mike. It's taken years, but I've been able to make my schedule now where I have more freedom so I can go help my best friend pick up her daughter from school. I'm like that person that's like, yeah, I'll go do it. If I can help, I will do it. And it just feels good. And yeah, that is something that's really hard because like as a kid, I grew up like, we got to hold on. But my mom was always giving to people like homeless people on the street. She was a very giving person, but then we were struggling living paycheck to paycheck. So as a confusion inside of me, wait, we're giving, but we don't really have it. And so when I got older, I was like, I got to hold on to all my money because I can't give it because I'm not going to, it was some of that mindset that you were talking about as a kid. Yeah, that's scarcity. But I agree on just like being able to implement and talk about giving. And you wanted to talk a little bit too about like how you can shift from like greed and envy. I know you talked about this with your kids, and I think you're doing a really good job of teaching them this. But how do you shift from that mindset, like the greed and wanting and that desire? And maybe obviously we get to a point where like we do desire more and want better, but staying in that abundance and mindfulness and gratitude at the same time.
Yeah, I feel like that's got to be tough for kids, David. So
it's pretty tough
I'm
for
just
us
speaking
too,
from
but
my
like
experience with teenage daughters. Hey, but
Yeah.
real quick, so like I love the question that Tanya asked you, but I see that's one of the great things about being a podcast host is we get to be a little bit selfish and ask the questions that we want answers to. So Tanya
tell
asked
us what to
something that I
do.
think is very beneficial to me, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, I also want to thank Tanya on mentioning how hard it was for you as well in your financial journey.
Yeah.
Because for me personally, this was one of the hardest lessons. This was a lesson I wrote for myself because, especially being a money nerd, it's very easy to think of like the time value of money. So it's hard to break that mindset of if I invest it and it grows, I'll have more to give. And so tomorrow I'll have more to give than today. But the problem with that way of thinking is tomorrow never comes.
Yeah.
So you need to start embracing it. So yeah, it's definitely, I love that you mentioned that because for me, it's something I've had to work at as well because it breaks that whole pattern of saving, which is how I was brought up as well in my
And it's
mind.
the
So
trusting, it's the trusting and the energetic side that you're talking about that I think is really cool too. Like you're trusting and having faith that more money will come back to you. If you're giving, you'll be able to have more to give others, which is
yeah,
like a spiritual thing as well.
it's definitely a leap of faith and it has been tricky, but it does work. And then in terms of just that greed, kids are selfish and they're greedy.
No
That's just
comment.
how, yeah, like
Just in case they
I
listen to this.
I love kids, but that is what they like, that is what they are. Their world is basically themselves. And so it is tricky, but again, kids are smart, like they really are. So
They're figuring it out.
they're figuring it out. So you start
Yeah.
highlighting what's really important. You start noticing when they're laughing and excited and happy, and when they're not, or when they get something and they're disappointed because it's just not something that interests them anymore, or that thing that they really wanted that now is forgotten and it's sitting in the closet or under the bed. You just mention those things, and not from a way of position of making them feel guilty, but just awareness. And they'll start to notice, like, what are the things I love to do? What do I love to do with my time? When am I the happiest? And it does start to shift it. And that's the thing, is like the greed is thinking that things will make you happier. And so chasing those things. But once you realize what really does make you happy, it really is one of those things where, like, the more you focus on what brings you joy. And so I was mentioning like some examples, like a great example, and this involves kids, which I love, is someone who read the book and he was reading it with their kids and he was talking about the awesome stuff. And at the time, the kids really wanted to get a new dog, like a puppy. And most parents, we can relate with that, and kids wanting it. And again, like, I'm not against dogs. I've had dogs myself and I love puppies. But in this case, they're expensive for one, and they're going to be a lot of time. And so the parent said, you know what, like, for me personally, like, my awesome stuff, mom really wants to go back to school. She's been wanting to go back to school, but it's really expensive. But that's my awesome stuff. I would love to be able to do that. And these kids who wanted the puppy like a second prior, all of a sudden were like, let's send mom to school. And it just immediately shifted from like this lack mentality, this greed, like, I want the puppy, begging and pleading, get me the puppy, to we're sending mom to school. And it's not that they didn't want the puppy anymore, but they found something that was more important to them. And so it didn't matter that they didn't have the puppy. And that's how this stuff just shifts. And it sounds so simple, but it has powerful implications like that. And you start to see the kids shift. So these kids now, they're not, it's a complete change of perspective where the situation is almost identical.
Again, I find myself saying this a lot with everything that you're saying, Dave, but I love that. It makes me think about every year at Thanksgiving, we do, with one of the local groups out here, we go out to the women's shelter and we feed the people that are there. And it's always been a great experience for my daughters to see that it's important that you give when you can, right? And I feel like that lesson that you were talking about gives them a lesson in empathy, right? That they learned that their mother really wanted to go back to school, and instead of putting themselves first, put somebody else first for a change, right? Because kids will always put themselves first. They always will.
Yeah.
But when I took my kids to this women's shelter and they saw what other people were going through in life, and then they were giving their time, they were giving their effort in that moment. Afterwards, they told me, they said, this was really great. And I want to do this again. Like, this was something that it was moving for them, right? Which was very moving for me. And I feel like empathy is probably not something children learn that much, right? They're not going to learn it from social media. They're not going to learn it too much from school. That is something that has to be a gift from the parents, right? That we give them that. So I really liked that description there. Like, I'm 100% getting this book and reading it with my girls. But it makes me want to sit down and have a family meeting tonight and say, I want to sit down with them and I want to ask them. I might have an idea of what I think it is, but I want to ask them what their awesome stuff is. I want to know what it is that they want in life besides what I think it might be. I can tell you right now, my oldest, she'll probably tell me that being on the phone with her boyfriend is her awesome stuff, right? Cool. But no, really, like, let's get into that, right? So no, I like that. So Again, another selfish thing here that I'm getting out of this podcast episode, and I really love that. However, David, I want to go ahead and transition this now into, well, actually, real quick before we do that, I want to see if Tanya had anything else before we go into the final round. If there was another question you might have wanted to ask before we shift there.
I mean, yeah, I could keep going for a while, but I think we
I
got
know.
some
I
really
think
good
we'll go
points.
forever.
Yeah, I think we got to some really good points and things for people to think about and just really going deeper, which I really like.
Mhm.
So yeah, let's go into the final round. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. So, hey, David, so this part of the podcast, I'm going to ask you the same 4 questions that we ask everybody that comes on the show. It gives us a good idea of how you are when you get asked a pointed question, right? Which, I mean, I already know where this is going to go. You're going to crush it, but and it's not that bad. I always make it sound like intimidating, and it's really nothing. But if you're ready to go, we'll get this one going. But yeah, so David, the first question of the final round is, what's the biggest mistake that you've ever made when it comes to your finances or your business life?
Oh, yeah, I know that is a good pointed question. I mean, there's so many mistakes, but the big thing, like for me, and that's part of writing this book, and the reason I don't get into tactical is because as a money nerd, I love the tactical. So I was reading finance books and I've done day trading and I've done all the different things. And the reality is simpler usually is better. And the amount of emotional stress to try to like just play the game instead of just setting things on automation and letting them do their thing. My life could have been so much simpler if I just invested in this entire stock market, set it, forget it, and didn't think about it. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Awesome.
so simple, right? It's like we try to overcomplicate it, like you said, but it can be simple and it shouldn't have to be like 15 credit cards, 3 bank accounts, like all this stuff that people overcomplicate. What is something that you've learned that you wish you would have known when you first started out?
I was always investing early, like I mentioned, like I was reading those finance books and I saw compound interest. I understood how important it was, but I still, lifestyle inflation still crept in. And if I was just a little bit more aggressive in those early years and just really set a much harder savings rate in those early years, when money didn't really in your 20s, you're not spending money anyway. Not like you are in your 30s and your 40s, you start having a family. If you took those few years and were just a lot more aggressive on your savings and didn't touch it and let it grow, let the compounding happen, that impact in your 40s and 50s is just mind-blowing.
Yeah, that's why compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world for sure. It's amazing what our money can do when you employ it to actually work for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
I look at all my dollars are like little soldiers and sailors, and I look at it from a military perspective, right? 20 years in the Navy. But yeah, I send my troops to battle, right? And I want them to go get the spoils of war and bring back more, right? So
Yeah.
no, that's great. Okay, David, so the next question of the final round is, do you have any tips or tricks that you would recommend to someone that is just getting started today?
Yeah. The biggest thing is one, just talking about this stuff. So it's crazy that we feel like we should really understand finances and investing and macroeconomics and all this stuff to this minute detail and really get it. Whereas even with cars, we'll take it into a car dealership and get our car fixed. And so if you can feel comfortable to just ask for help, admit that you might not know everything there is to do about investing, go into a bank or find a financial advisor. You don't need to know it all yourself. And as Tanya was saying, simpler usually is better. There are ways where you can just put all your money in the entire stock market. And if you don't know what that means, you can ask someone and they'll tell you how to do it. You don't have to make any decisions and they don't have to make any decisions. It's just automated. Like it can happen. But
Index
you have
funds and
to,
ETFs all day, baby.
right? And
Get
that's
it and
all you
forget it.
need to do. And if you don't understand what that is, ask someone and they'll help you. Like just feeling comfortable to talk about it. And then you don't have to worry about it.
Love it.
So good. I always say that when I'm doing my coaching course and my online content too. It's like, go to the expert, right? Like, okay, if you don't know something, who is the person? And I explain even investing this way, because I work with an advisor and I want to know what he's doing. Like when I go to get my car fixed, I don't want to work on my own car, right? Like I want to know what they're doing before I give them money, but I don't want to get under the hood and do that work. Like give it to the expert, ask the expert. You want to know the basics, but some of that you don't have to put so much pressure on yourself. I think there's so much like guilt and shame around money, and then you see TikToks and all this stuff of people like, oh, I invested in this and I made $1 million yesterday. You know what I mean? You're just like, what am I doing wrong? Why don't I? It's just, yeah, it's funny how.
Well, but be able to ask those things like why, like, okay, you told me I should invest in this. Why? Just ask
Yeah.
the why. Don't be like, oh yeah, no, I know. Yeah, that makes so much sense because I would do the same. No, ask them why. Like you said, the same with the mechanic. Like, why are you choosing this? What made you want to do this? Like, ask them the questions and make sure you're comfortable with what comes back.
Yeah, they'll always give me like that list of everything I need done on my car. And I'm like, what is the priority? Can we prioritize these? Like, what can I wait till? And almost every single time is like, oh, well, you could wait 6 more months to do that. It's like, you just have to be curious and ask those questions. Like, you'll save a lot of money doing it, save a lot of money and time. One of the final questions here is, besides your own book, do you have any other favorite business investing or real estate related podcasts, books, or both?
Yeah, so for me, one of the books I loved, and this is just because I was young and I read it, and it's a really big book in Canada as well, or it was at the time, is The Wealthy Barber by David Chilton. And what I love about it is it took financial literacy and just put it into a story that everybody could understand and grasp and get. And it talks about like the compound interest and different savings rates. And that was sort of one of my early books that really inspired me. So I go back to that often. And it's just a simple book. I also recently read The Psychology of Money, which I love because I find it's so rare to have these conversations about the psychology of money, but it is so much more important. Like, how do you keep your money and build the habit of saving and have a good relationship with money and not always be stressed and having this lack mentality? Like, those things are so important. And that's a great book where it talks about it and shows examples. So I found a lot of what I read in that book resonated with me.
Awesome. Hey, David, go ahead and pat yourself on the back. You made it through the final round that I made sound so intimidating when it really wasn't. But no, that's fantastic. So great recommendations. And just so far, everything in this interview has just been fantastic. Just the conversation that we're having, your demeanor, everything. I love it. I love it. So again, that was it for the final round. But I do have a question I want to ask you. And this is the most important question. You're probably going to get asked this entire interview. So no pressure. But no, it's easy. There are people that are listening right now that said this conversation that you guys had with David's just been amazing. Learned a lot, even though it's just some wave top stuff, learned a lot. And I want to learn more. And I want to know where I could find more about David and his book. So if you could, can you share that with us? Do you have a website, any social media profiles that people could follow to get more information about you?
Yeah, the brand is all around the awesome stuff, because that's what's so important to me. So if you go to theawesomestuff.com, you'll find information on me. If you go on Instagram or TikTok at the awesome stuff, and you'll be able to see information there. And the book itself, it's The Golden Quest, and you can get it at Amazon or your local bookstore or anywhere else. Just ask for The Golden Quest. It's a graphic novel, and it was written so kids get it, but it actually is full of content for adults. So feel free to read as adults as well. And then, yeah, I do public speaking and talk about this stuff all the time. So if anyone did want to reach out, they can find me through those avenues and reach out to me directly.
We'll make sure we have all those links in the show notes to make it easy for our listeners. But you all know the drill. If you're driving right now, wait till you're in a safe place and you'll be able to copy and paste and click away, get some more information on David, his book, and see some of his speaking engagements. Just awesome. Actually, this is awesome stuff. Add that to your list of awesome stuff. But Tanya, over to you.
Yeah. Do you have any final thoughts or any like final words of wisdom that we didn't bring up, or anything you want to say?
No, I had a great conversation as well. I love this. It was great talking to you again, Tanya, and meeting you, Mike. I will say, so one of my biggest passions with this stuff is it's easy to find information on how to invest, and you can find advisors out there. And that stuff is readily available. But right now, there's not a lot of there's so much shame, like you mentioned before, and insecurity around money. Like for me, the reason I'm so passionate about this is just trying to make it so people just feel comfortable talking about it. And it's as simple as that. Like if we can start having these conversations with our kids, with our friends, and just normalize financial literacy, I mean, it would make things so much better. And it kills me the way we shame our spenders or make people feel insecure or guilty or like they made poor decisions and that's why they're in a poor financial situation. It can be so much gentler and there can be so much more grace when we have these conversations. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Awesome. Awesome. David, thank you so much for that. Thank you for what you do, the service you provide to other people, the way you explain it in a manner that's easily digestible for people to just really get it. Like they don't need a translator app or anything. They don't need to go Google stuff because you put it out there in a very great way to understand. So definitely want to thank you for that. And I want to thank you and Tanya and I also, Tanya, you guys having this already knowing each other was fantastic, right? So it already added to an already awesome dynamic. But I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk with me and Tanya and share your story on the podcast today. It was absolutely awesome.
Oh, thanks so much. And I mean, I hope you could tell how passionate I am about this stuff. So it's a pleasure. It's a joy. It's I'm happy to have these conversations anytime.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
love it. And also, besides thanking you, David, I also would be remiss if I didn't thank all of our amazing listeners that are tuning in right now. And just thank you all so much. It really means a lot that you joined me and Tanya and David on the Average Joe Finances podcast today.
Yeah, we thank you guys so much for listening and make sure that you go leave us that 5-star review. It really helps the podcast grow. And we love to know what resonated with you today and what you're going to hopefully share with your kids after this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Hope you all got something great out of this. And aloha from Hawaii.
And bye from Lake Tahoe.
And have a great rest of your day. And actually, and you could say goodbye from Canada too,
Yeah,
David.
good night from Canada. West
There you
Coast
go.
of
Good night from
Canada.
Canada. Awesome, guys. Thank you all so much. This was really fun.
Thank you.
Thank you for making it to the end of this episode. Greatly appreciate you being here with me today on the Average Joe Finances podcast. If you haven't done so yet, make this the episode that you go leave us a 5-star rating or subscribe to our YouTube channel. The Average Joe Finances podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Have an outstanding day.